Hello and welcome back to the Energy Transition Hub, supported by Energy UK and Renewable UK. I'm Charles Wood, the Deputy Director of Policy at Energy UK, and today we'll be focusing on heat. So I'll be giving a short presentation first, and then I will be joined by a fantastic panel of speakers to discuss some of the challenges facing us as we decarbonise heat. So, decarbonising heat. We have had multiple publications recently, strategies, and we now have to go from strategy to delivery. The evidence base for decarbonising heat is very clear. The evidence has set out the need for urgency, and over the course of the past 10 years, heat and energy efficiency have slowly moved up the agenda. And the CCC has set out that heat from buildings is one of the biggest decarbonisation challenges for the UK. For policymakers, it's a huge challenge in terms of getting consumers on board and ensuring that negative headlines don't cause a negative perception of decarbonisation processes. The progress made to date has centred around the use of a few core subsidies in the UK, the energy company's obligation, which increases the use of energy efficiency measures delivered by energy retailers, the renewable heat incentive, which gave upfront grants only recently, but before that was a long, slow payment back on the cost of low carbon heat installations. The Green Homes grant, which has incurred quite a bit of negative press based on how it was run, but was intended to be an upfront grant for energy efficiency and heat measures in the follow-up from the pandemic. And the Heat Networks Investment Project and other similar projects that have been used to deliver heat networks, district heating, to the UK. None of these projects have been able to create a sustained market growth for the UK low carbon heat market or the energy efficiency market. And as such, there is a significant challenge ahead for us. So, the heat and building strategies, what's the key points that were in those? Scotland in focus. Given that we're in Glasgow, it makes sense to start here. And it also makes sense to start here because Scotland has done a brilliant job so far of decarbonisation, and this strategy was quite the example for the rest of the UK. Scottish Government set a really ambitious plan for decarbonisation of heat, focusing on proactively establishing frameworks and mechanisms for decarbonisation, including energy efficiency, where all homes will be at EPC C by 2030, and where feasible by 2033. Zero emission heating, where over 1 million homes and 50,000 non-domestic buildings will be addressed by 2030. And this includes half of the 2 million gas-connected homes. And affordable warmth, protecting those who are at risk from increased energy bills. The Scottish strategy also addressed the approach of localisation and how local areas can deliver heat and energy efficiency strategies in order to enable the most effective and cost-effective solutions to be used in local areas. The heat and building strategy for the UK had 4 pillars: energy efficiency, heat pump markets, heat networks, and research and trials. On energy efficiency, the heat and building strategy repeated the 2017 Clean Growth Strategy ambition for all homes to reach EPC C by 2035, and a commitment to use regulation in the private rented sector. For the heat pump markets, there is subsidy, and there is also discussion about a market mechanism to make heat pumps more competitive with gas boilers. For heat networks, it's a continuation of the same, but an expansion of existing projects to fund and to try and give investors confidence to invest in heat districts in the UK at a larger scale than we have presently. And for research and trials, it's the question primarily of hydrogen. What is the role for hydrogen? How do we ensure that consumers can have access to it? And how quickly do we think that we can roll it out based on research and trials currently ongoing? There is a twin-track approach for the UK so far to electrification and low-carbon gas, with trials being run for hydrogen and biomethane also being looked at, but electrification seeing a clear boost from government with a 600,000 installations by 2028, so per year by 2028, target set by the UK government in order to create a growth in that market. This is lower than the CCC's recommendation of 900,000 per year, so quite a gap there. And there's also a huge gap between the current installation rate, which is in the 30,000 area, compared to that 600,000 a year target. For heat networks, the savings here are compensated by higher from non-domestics. So there's an ambition for 15 terawatt hours of heat to be supplied by heat networks by 2030, again lower than the 25 terawatt hours suggested by the Committee on Climate Change. And for energy efficiency, a lot of reconfirmation, a lot of existing policies pulled into one document, which is useful. And that target of EPC-C where feasible and cost effective by 2035. But it's unclear what this means in terms of deployment of measures. And there is a clear gap for the owner-occupied sector, those who are able to pay in particular. And for investment, there was a commitment from UK government to an increased spend, including 60 million for a heat pump ready programme. So what comes next? How do we deliver on that ambition? There are some key differences from the CCC recommendations, which focus on a market-based approach. The Heat and Building Strategy for the UK commits to developing some major markets for heat pumps by improving consumer offerings and securing cost reductions. That includes an obligation, potential for an obligation on boiler manufacturers to also be manufacturing heat pumps or to be buying carbon credits from those who are. Standards phasing out the use of boilers, oil boilers in particular, those most polluting boilers, particularly on the off-gas grid homes from 2026, and gas boilers from 2035. A small increase in the proposed grant funding that should address tens of thousands of heat pumps, but will not quite get us to the 600,000, and a commitment to rebalancing the costs of policy, whether it's social policy or environmental policy, that currently sit on electric bills. That is quite the touchy and sensitive topic at the moment, given the price of gas. So we're not surprised to see that that decision has been delayed slightly further. There is a question of whether or not heat pumps can compete with gas boilers by 2030. So I'm glad that we have Clem Cowton on our panel today, who will be able to speak to that point. But the Heat and Building Strategy puts the onus on industry to deliver. But we have some significant questions there of if the market is able to support new customer propositions. Is the retail market fit for purpose? Can we ensure that that market becomes stable enough and attractive enough to invest in at scale? And if not, what are the core barriers and how can we tackle those as a sector? So the ambition and vision is positive, but there is clarity needed for delivery. Number one, there's a gap in the approach for owner-occupiers. What drives those who own their own homes to install energy efficiency measures? And what kind of support do they have if they can't afford it? So the phase out of new oil heating from 2026 will impact 2 million homes. But there's little yet to motivate the 24 million with boilers or 15 million needing basic insulation. The approach to a voluntary obligation on mortgage providers and a minimum standard for the sale and purchase of homes was effectively mooted. And the 2021 priority is we need clarity. We need to understand how energy efficiency is going to be delivered at scale and how heating upgrades can be bundled in with that kind of retrofit project. Number two, there's a gap in support for low-income households. The Heat and Buildings strategy commits to support for the fuel poor with the costs of transition, but there's a gap between the funding committed, which is approximately 1 billion per year for eco, and the fuel poor. England has 3 million plus households in fuel poverty, or close to it. And there's a larger group that is likely to need support, with some figures suggesting that 5 million households are in utility arrears. So how can those households be encouraged to make the shift if they are struggling with their bills already? And green finance will help. Increasingly, financiers are looking to the energy sector and asking what they should be offering in terms of mortgage rates, in terms of offers for consumers who are installing low carbon technology. But they need help and they need innovation from the sector. So it can't just be conventional mortgage products. We have to be looking at the wider spectrum of financial products. And thirdly, it's vital to keep consumers on board. As the CCC has stated, their approach focuses on lower running costs to effectively make up for the higher upfront cost of installation of energy efficiency measures and low carbon heat, and the disruption of retrofit. And in past, eco and other measures have failed to encourage and enthuse consumers about energy efficiency. It's quite often very difficult to sell to them or even to install for free. So a business-led rollout needs to carefully manage those risks. Businesses, industry, government all need to be working together in order to convince consumers that low carbon heat and energy efficiency are the right way to go. And we also need to be considering what is the impact on bills. Reducing the upfront cost of a heat pump is not the only problem. We also have to make sure that we're giving a viable solution in terms of the long-term lifetime cost of that installation. So, I think I've spoken far enough, so I will now invite the panelists to join me. So bear with us, we will be right back with a panel of experts. Welcome back. So you've certainly heard enough from me so far, so I will immediately pass over for introductions and some opening comments from the speakers. So first we've got Raggy Lowe, so a bit of a perspective from Scottish Government.
Great, thanks very much. Charlie's done a lot of my introductory remarks for me already. The Scottish Government published our heat and building strategy on the 7th of October. Charlie's already given you the headlines, or most of the headlines from that. I just wanted to pull out a few more things that are probably worth people knowing about and I think speak to that point about delivery. The main one is the commitment to invest at least 1.8 billion over this Scottish parliamentary term in heat and energy efficiency measures, with 200 million going to public sector estate, 200 million going to social housing, 400 million going to large projects, well over 400 million on fuel poverty projects, fuel poverty support through our existing schemes and future schemes, building on those, Warmer Homes Scotland and our area-based schemes. And then a conversion of our current cashback on our loans, which are providing support to households to install energy efficiency measures and zero emissions heat measures, converting that current cashback against an interest-free loan into a straightforward grant. So I think that's the sort of headline in terms of delivery. We're also committed to setting up a national public energy agency which will drive forward that delivery programme and also help to raise public awareness and make sure that consumers understand how the transition is going to affect them, what it means for them and what support they can access. And I shall leave it there and hopefully we can come back to some of those points.
Thank you very much. That was certainly a lot from Scottish Government and it's fantastic to see. So firstly, well done. And we'll get into the finer points shortly, but I'll now pass to Randolph.
Thanks, Charlie. So I'm Randolph, Director of Innovation and Electricity Systems at the Energy Networks Association, or ENA. We represent all of the gas and electricity networks in the UK and Ireland, or the wires and pipes. And heat from a networks perspective is a tricky one. It's as tricky for networks as it is for houses and others. You think about an electric vehicle, well, it's stationary 95+% of the time. So you've got options there, there's flexibility there. Heat doesn't work in quite the same way. In fact, my favourite meme at the moment, which I was saying to Raggy earlier, is a fictitious energy party, and you've got people milling around the outsides of the room as energy buzzwords. So you've got blockchain, you've got electric vehicles, renewables, you've got someone who's starting up a direct air capture startup, and then you've got this enormous elephant in the middle of the room with heat labelled on it. And that is how it feels sometimes, and it is a tricky nut to crack. But from a networks perspective, we very much see this as a systems problem. So we try and take a whole systems approach. So all of the technologies that Charlie talked about, we've got to consider all of them, we've got to investigate all of them. Different technologies are going to work in different areas. When I moved to this country a few years ago, I moved in winter. I walked into my flat and I was like, what is this weird metal square on the wall emitting heat? Never seen it before. I'm used to the heat coming out of an air vent in the roof. I later found out it was a radiator with hot water running through it. But I think that's an extreme example, but I think it's the same in the UK and globally. There's different heat solutions for different areas with very different housing stocks. From a networks perspective, we very much take a bit of a two-pronged approach. You've got to invest in the networks, ensure there's enough capacity in networks, whether it's gas or electricity, to deliver heat. So that's sort of traditional reinforcement. But equally, we've got to start looking more at flexibility. And flexibility is something that I hope we can focus on today. We're pretty strong on, regardless of what heat technology you have in your home, you must pair it with some form of storage. There's a range of different types. You can have thermal inertia in the building. Energy efficiency will help that. You could have a battery. You could have a hot water heater, a phase shift device. There's a range of different storage devices, but That flexibility is critical because not only does it help networks and reduce our costs, it also enables new revenue streams and lower bills for customers. So I hope we can delve into that a bit more today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randolph. And to our final speaker, Clem.
Thanks. So Octopus Energy was started with a mission to tackle climate change and make energy cheaper and fairer. And so that is the principle that we bring to every single thing that we do. How we've tackled the energy system so far, we're a digital technology business. So our inspiration has come from companies like, controversially, Amazon or Uber, for example, or Apple, where those companies that have come into markets, thrown everything out, started again, created amazing products that customers really love, and scaled them very fast, disrupted massive markets and supply chains, and made products that people find desirable, intuitive, and become very mass market in a very short space of time. Inspiration from that is what we need. That kind of shift and pace of change is what we need to see in decarbonisation globally, and then more specifically in heat decarbonisation in the UK. So our plan is to turn heat pumps into mass market product and decarbonise through consumerisation. So that means rather than kind of anguishing over getting every single home to an A-rated efficiency, or trying to figure out how to do a very, very expensive centralised programme of infrastructure upgrades, or lecturing people about what they should be doing if they're going to do green, our solution is to make heat pumps as affordable as a new gas boiler. And when the English and Welsh grant, not the Scottish one, but when the UK government grant launches in April, we will already have, by that point, a product which, when combined with the grant, will be as cheap as a new gas boiler. And we expect over the next couple of years after that to bring down the actual cost of our products to in line with a new gas boiler. So the subsidy will no longer be needed, and we will be selling these products at mass market, at scale. Great products that people really love, and they want them because they're better, not because they're being told to have them. We've seen it done with electric vehicles. That shift is already happening, and Octopus is part of that drive for change as well. We love flexibility, and we totally agree with Randolph, and we're working very hard with a lot of the UK DNOs. Oh, I'm so sorry, that's an alarm on my phone. I'm going to go grab that in a second. So we are working with electricity networks very hard to help them to scale up decarbonisation, flexibility through electrification and through digitalisation, and we plan to make those savings available to our customers. I think in Randolph's analogy of the party, there's a kind of I'd say the elephant in the room is probably not heat in the middle, but the distractions around the edges. So I think you mentioned maybe direct air capture as being a technology that potentially could distract everyone and slow it down. I'd say hydrogen for heat is maybe the clown at the party, making a lot of noise, entertaining everyone and providing, but effectively providing a massive distraction that stops us from getting where we need to get to. And I think it's really important that we understand that if we are going to be decarbonising the UK heating space, we need to be doing so through an efficient means, that's electrification, i.e. not losing immediately 40% of the energy just through electrolysis, when we can perfectly easily put electricity straight into homes and decarbonise through much better, cleaner, more comfortable heat pumps.
Thank you, Clem.
And apologies for the alarm on my phone there.
That's all right. Okay, that was a fantastic set of introductions. I think one key theme that was talked to for each of you was cost. And I think given the current state of the market, it's something that we should start with. In terms of cost, what needs to happen to ensure that consumers are paying a fair price, that we keep costs as low as possible for consumers, and that we can sustainably fund, both through private investment and public investment, the approach to decarbonisation. And I'll start with you, if that's all right, Rani.
That's okay.
Just to talk to the government side in terms of how do you fund these projects and make sure that it's sustainable and that consumers have that access to that funding?
So two things I'd like to say on that. I think one is, well, I've set out the scale of our investment this coming sort of 4.5 years. We're clear that that is not enough. Private investment is essential in order to drive this change, and in terms of the overall heat transition for Scotland, and the capital investment needs to happen in buildings, our estimates are that that could be around 33 billion. So a lot of private investment is required. We're setting up a task force to help us think through how we can leverage, you mentioned different financial products. I think exactly those sorts of innovations leverage investment alongside our public investment. So I think that's one key thing is how do we combine different investment flows and facilitate that transition at pace. And then the second thing I think is around running costs. We are, our Scottish Government programmes already support people with the capital costs, particularly targeting that at those least able to afford it. But running costs is an issue, and you alluded to this. We're very keen that the UK Government publish in full the rest of their affordability and fairness call for evidence, and that decision on how to rebalance prices across gas and electricity, that is expedited. I think that will it won't remove the problem, and I take Clem's exciting prospect of price parity in terms of a gas boiler and a heat pump. But rebalancing prices won't completely resolve the disparity between the running costs of gas and electricity, but it will go some significant way to doing that. So we're very keen for that to happen as soon as possible.
And we'll turn to Randolph next. Networks. There is a huge question there of not only how do you ensure we've got enough capacity on electricity networks, but then what happens to the gas network, and for the UK in particular. We've got a pretty comprehensive gas network, so what happens with that infrastructure? How do we ensure that we're using it in the most cost-effective way? And then there's further questions like the cost of CCUS infrastructure, so carbon capture and shipping the carbon out, and potentially a hydrogen network. So a bit of an understanding from the networks of how do we approach that investment, and what do you need in order to deliver effectively?
Yeah, so I mean, cost is key. I don't know how much we can stretch this party analogy, but it's not an all paid for party. Everyone's paying their own way, and they want to keep their costs down. So it's the same with networks, right? So there's a number of ways that we think about networks and how we're going to try and keep those costs down. So the first thing is, we fully agree with what the Committee on Climate Change is saying, that we're thinking about 2050 and beyond here. So if you are going to build a network, whether it's gas or electricity, and it's got to be upgraded, build it once and build it right. So build it the right size when you're replacing it. Don't just build it for like 10 years ahead. You don't want to dig up the road twice between now and 2050. That's sort of the most fundamental thing. Do it right, do it once and do it right. Then when you are talking about the networks themselves, you've got to try and minimise those costs. And that's where flexibility is absolutely critical to minimising those costs. It's not a case of investment or flexibility. Sometimes people pitch it as a choice of one or the other. It's both. You need both all the time. So you've got to use flexibility, and that is flexibility because networks typically wouldn't own that flexibility. That's got to be flexibility from customers who have that flexibility in their homes and businesses. We want to be able to access that. The other thing is taking a systems approach. We'll get into the debate about hydrogen, I'm sure, but even if you are talking about green hydrogen, that's actually electrification as well. Because if you are producing green hydrogen, regardless of whether it's for homes or businesses, that's actually an electrification problem as well. So we've got to try and take a systems approach when we think of these things. And if you take a systems approach, think about all of different use cases and different applications in different areas, you can optimise costs. Now, specifically in terms of gas networks and hydrogen, we'll get into the debate of whether it's in the home or not, but hydrogen will play a critical role in some sectors. There's no doubt about that. There's some no-brainers that I think most people agree with, heavy industry, heavy transport, aviation, things like that. So there'll definitely be a role for hydrogen. I guess the debate will be on how much and into which locations. One thing I will say though is that I'd probably agree with Clem that if you needed heat in one place at one point in time in a home, producing electricity from renewables and using it right then and there, that would definitely be the most efficient solution. There's no doubt about that. But if you need to store up a lot of that heat for winter, for example, like a month's worth of that heat, it's going to be very difficult to store that electrically for that point in time. So maybe you want to put it in hydrogen, and then maybe you put it back to electricity, I don't know, but there will be a big role for that sort of thing. And CCUS, not my area of expertise, so I might just leave that one.
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. You've touched on another potentially sensitive subject there, gas storage, and if we have enough of it. Finally, we'll come to you, Clem.
Thank you.
In terms of the business view, what do you need in order to sell those effectively affordable and attractive customer propositions?
I mean, not an enormous amount, actually, and much less than the sector has historically been asking for. Our strategy is to, so at the moment, the decarbonised heat industry in the UK is a cottage industry, and that means that there's a very small number of companies doing very bespoke projects, buying at a very small scale, and that makes everything high quality on the whole, but expensive and slow and difficult to scale. So what we need to be able to do is take a mass marketisation model to it. And I think that when we think about what private investment do we mean, actually Octopus just a few weeks ago received $600 million worth of investment from Al Gore's investment fund Generation, who are now a shareholder in our business, and that investment was, for a number of things, one of which being to continue to expand our mission globally, but with a very strong emphasis on decarbonisation of heat. And we were told in no uncertain terms by Mr. Gore when he visited our offices that he was really excited to see the rollout of heat pumps, and he wanted that to be a really strong focus of our activity. I mean, we didn't need to be told twice because we'd already spent £10 million building a heat pump centre in Slough, which has an enormous research and development and engineering training facility. But I think that demonstrates the scale of appetite globally to invest in these solutions, and where there are companies that are looking to be ambitious, that are looking to bring this to a wider audience, those dollars are kind of hungry for places to invest. I think what I would say in terms of policy, we only need we need three things. One has already been announced by the UK government, and something similar from the Scottish government, which is a kind of very simple grant scheme to enable people to get an immediate reduction in the sticker price of a heat pump, as we have done with the EV grant, actually, with the plug-in grant. That when you go to the dealership floor, that you probably can't drive off in the EV, because unfortunately there are a very long waiting lists for electric vehicles because the demand is so high. But if you were to, you would know that you would get to get a very large discount very quickly, and that was guaranteed. So at the moment, what the UK government has announced is £5,000. We actually think that's probably a bit too generous. It's they wanted to err on the side of caution and make sure that the rest of the market could come with it. But we think that can reduce very significantly, and actually we should be prioritising higher number of installs with a lower grant, so that industry can invest to bring down the cost of the supply chain. Secondly is to shift I think everyone has alluded to actually, is this idea of shifting the levies from electricity. But at the moment, we pay a massive amount of tax on electricity bills and basically none on our gas bills. That's the wrong way round. It's like putting the fizzy drinks tax on a bottle of water. We need to be shifting that over so that we're putting our taxes in the right place to enable behaviour change, with obviously support for lower income households to enable them to make that shift. And the third thing is actually something that I think Randolph would agree with me on, is investment in enabling flexibility. So at the moment, we are charged, retailers like Octopus are charged the same for using the networks, more or less, regardless of when our customers are using their energy. What we need to be doing is making sure that we are able to pass on savings to customers for using electricity at times when there are lots of renewables on the system and when the local wires aren't congested, so that we can, potentially put off some of those upgrades. I take your point, Randolph, that we need to be both growing and using the network more flexibly, but what we also need to be doing is flexibility first, so that we are getting that maximum out of our network and then looking to upgrade it and then looking to upgrade it, and putting those investment signals in the right place so that we aren't unnecessarily spending money on large, very, very disruptive. You've got to remember that if you need to replace a gas pipe or an electricity wire, you have to dig up a street. You have to spend an enormous amount of money centrally planning in these infrastructure upgrades, and it's not a great way of doing it. If we can persuade people to charge up their electric vehicles or run their heat pumps at slightly different times, there is absolutely massive capacity in our networks at the moment. What I would say, though, in the spirit of, I think you said, build it once and build it right, is the current projected cost of upgrading the gas network to just the pipes to enable them to have hydrogen through them is about, I think, 22 to 23 billion pounds. That is the same as the current estimated regulatory as the value of that entire asset base, the regulatory asset base. And I think if you were to take your car to a mechanic and they said it'll cost the same amount to fix it as it's currently worth, you'd think very hard about actually just getting rid of the car and maybe putting that money instead towards a new car, particularly if that new car was likely to be an electric vehicle, which was cheaper to run and broke down less often. And I think that's also the way we need to start thinking about our electricity system, which is rather than trying to find ways of patching together a gas network that in 10 to 15 years' time might be able to burn hydrogen in people's homes. Still a lot of leaks, still no demonstration projects happening at scale of that way. They've all totally replaced their pipes where there have been any demonstration projects, and certainly no route to commercial viability for hydrogen heat. Actually, if we focus now our efforts on making our grid more flexible, upscaling our electricity grid, getting really affordable and great products into people's homes to allow them both to use electric heat, which, by the way, is 300 to 400% efficient. That means that for every kilowatt hour of energy that goes into a heat pump, you get 3 to 4 kilowatt hours of heat coming out the other end, which is just astronomical. You get 0.9 with a gas boiler and probably less, and certainly less with a hydrogen boiler. So if we can persuade people to get those products by selling them great products, by investing in networks, both in flexibility and in upgrading networks, making connections happen faster, making our entire electricity system more agile, flexible, more resilient, renewables-based, we can save ourselves £22 billion worth of gas upgrades and a hell of a lot of money on the hydrogen for heating, when it should be used in the other industries that Randolph mentioned.
In the spirit of conversation, can I come back? I think, 2/3 of the gas distribution networks, not transmission but distribution, has been replaced already with plastic pipes, which are almost 100% hydrogen ready if you were to put it in there. It's not to say you would use that for heating. You might use that hydrogen network for other things. Depends on the area. It's quite locational. There are, I guess, other ways that you can think about. For example, if your gas pipe, a lot of the gas pipes are really old. That's why they're being replaced to plastic pipes. If you're digging up a road to replace that pipe, actually you could, if you got the local planning right, which maybe we can come on to later, but you could actually put in the gas plastic pipe anyway. You could put in a bigger electricity cable or a second electricity cable if the one there's already new. And you could potentially look at what happens with water and telecoms in that area as well. Local planning could be a way to bring some of those costs down. Gas transmission is a slightly different story, but certainly for gas distribution, it is moving quite quickly towards being hydrogen ready, just because of how old the pipes are anyway. if I could also make a non-networks point. So I agree with Claire. I'm a firm believer in heat pumps and that the cost will come down. I couldn't agree more. I think the point you made about the sticker price is interesting. I think that's right. And that's why I think also new financial models are going to be quite critical. So even if the 5,000 doesn't get over the full cost of it and there still is an upfront cost, if companies like Octopus and other suppliers can offer models where you basically don't have the upfront cost, so you sort of somehow pay it off over the life cycle of it, or you rent it from someone, I think that is going to really help with costs for customers. I think, you know, the digitalisation point as well, it's about bundling of services. So actually don't just provide heat, maybe provide all the energy for the house, transport as well. Bundling should bring the costs down as well. And the other thing, which is maybe where you might say the 5,000 is, I guess, a good level, is you shouldn't just get a heat pump. You should do something to put some form of storage with it. So, you know, whether that's upgrading your house to turn that into a thermal store, or putting a battery with it, or some sort of thermal storage. You know, in this country, apparently, we're ripping out 200,000 hot water tanks per year. That's criminal behaviour. That's like flexibility that's already there that networks and others could use and really keep the bills low. So, you know, maybe the 5,000 could go with some form of storage.
Well, I mean, what I should say is that the heat pump product that Octopus will launch will include the tank. So we will, and actually, I think the kind of the criminal element of ripping out tanks is actually not so much the tank itself, because they're not very efficient tanks. I don't know about you, but my parents warm their towels on their hot water tank, which I think tells you just as much as you need to know about how efficient that tank is. But it's the space for the tank. And there are going to be solutions to that as well. So, you know, making sure that we've got products available that are, you know, that take up less space, so that people who, for example, live in a flat don't have space on their, you know, in their flat for a water tank, also have options for going electric heat. But you're completely right that we do need to be looking at this. I'm always a bit cautious about saying holistically, because I don't mean in a sort of planned way. I don't think that we should be saying, you know, in order to get this heat pump, you must also tick these 5 boxes that say you've got these other measures as well. Because I think what happens then is that, as we've seen with the eco scheme, you can end up with some really like shoddy, box ticking, expensive approaches.
You need nuance.
You need great customer experience. You just need to be able to go into someone's home and say, right, here's your heat pump, and while I'm here, why don't I put some insulation in your loft? Or I noticed that actually you've got quite a lot of drafts in your door. Here's a thermal camera that will enable you to check out where you're losing the most heat from in your home, and we can tell you some simple measures and affordable measures to help you to address that. Because actually a lot of the heat that's lost in UK homes is actually from things like leaky doors and you know, a lot of the things that just by closing curtains, putting better thermal curtains in, could solve. I think we do need to see people engaging in that way, and I think we do need to be very cautious about sort of lecturing about taking a very centrally planned approach. I would agree, actually. I mean, one of the other crises that we have in this country is on the internet speed, and certainly in terms of and certainly in terms of you know, building up a digital economy that we need to see in order, you know, Octopus is part of the digital economy. Heat pumps are going to be part of the digital economy. They are going to be smart. We're going to need to be responsive to the needs of the energy system that requires really good internet. Setting up businesses in parts of the country, actually I was going to say parts of the country that aren't London, but frankly we can include London in this, really does need you to be able to move into an office quickly and get set up with fast internet straight away, particularly if you're using a sort of cloud computing. And so actually I think that you know, internet cables is a wonderful alternative use of the gas network, and I think probably we should be looking to invest in that. Toot sweet. But I do agree with you that oh, and one final thing is your point about the about bundling and about finance. Actually, 50%, roughly 50, I think it's just over half of boilers today are already bought on finance. So it's a model that customers are really familiar with, and you're totally right that we should be thinking about how we can make things that may, on the face of them, be a big upfront cost, but come with a lot of savings over the lifetime. We should be thinking about how to make that more accessible. And I'd probably give 2 notes of caution there. What the boiler industry has often also done is use that financing method as an extra revenue stream, so with quite high interest rates, for example, and bundling with a kind of insurance scheme, for example, which ends up costing people an absolute fortune.
Good point, yeah.
So I do think it's really important that where we're financing it is as a means of enabling people to get the product rather than as a way of making
all the right
money off it.
protection and
Exactly.
stuff like that,
Not
yeah,
even just
yeah.
protection, frankly. I mean, that the boiler industry is, the credit there is got protection on it. But I think it's about the ethical and the right thing to do is not to kind of immediately sort of get dollar signs in your eyes and see this as another way for the energy industry to kind of milk their customers for profits. It really does need to be about, at the lowest possible cost, enabling people to get that, to get that accessibility of the product. So on bundling, I'd also, a further note of caution is absolutely, if it can help to bring down the cost of a product that people can put it on their energy bill, for example, and pay it back over time, brilliant. What we do also need to be cautious about is lock-in.
Yeah.
So as we've seen in the mobile phone market previously, people would be end up paying well over the odds for the cost of the handset by being locked into expensive deals over time with exit fees and very punitive contracts that meant that was very difficult for them to escape. Octopus has no exit fees on our tariffs because we believe that we should be bearing the risk for market shifts that customers couldn't possibly understand. And I think we would need to see the same kind of approach with a bundling offer. So of course you shouldn't be able to join Octopus, get a heat pump, immediately move somebody somewhere else and never have to pay that cost of the heat pump. But likewise, we shouldn't be looking to make money off the sale of that heat pump through your energy bill, or forcing you to become a long-term customer of Octopus by effectively, enslaving you in a contract. So I do think that it's very important that we don't see. I think a lot of the pitch from maybe the finance industry and just more generally in the energy industry to investors and to others has been about great opportunity to find new sources of revenue, and I think that's really the wrong way. We should be looking to, all businesses should be looking to drive down the cost of these products so that we can get to decarbonisation faster but also fairer.
Good point.
Can I chip in with just an observation and maybe a question? So one of the other things that's going to be absolutely essential is good quality installation, so skills, which and building up the installer part of the supply chain, and we're doing some work on that and doing quite a lot of work around quality assurance, both for energy efficiency and for zero emissions heat installations. So I guess I have a question about the Octopus approach and the extent to which you've got a kind of an installer skills academy or some approach that also would stretch across the whole country, because the kind of issue of patchy provision of skills is also quite significant, and particularly in somewhere like Scotland where you've got some parts of the country where you don't have a kind of a local skills base necessarily, and that adds costs. So just interested in.
I'm so glad you asked, Raggy.
Yeah.
So what we've got at the moment is our first demonstrator project, which is not even a project actually, our first centre, which is in Slough. And it's in Slough partly because it's an opportunity to bring politicians and other people out there from London and very easily make heat pumps real. So we've got 2 homes built, we built from scratch in, by the way, 6 weeks. Turns out that it's actually not that difficult to build houses. So we've got 2 fully functioning homes in there that both enable our engineers to train on, for example, changing out microbore piping, for example, but also to enable people to really kind of see and feel what this looks like, and anybody here is very welcome to come and take a look at that. That though is equipped to train up 1,000 engineers per year. we've already had our first tranche of engineers graduate through that process. So there are multiple tracks. Some are for people who are already plumbers, some are for people who are already electricians, some are from maybe plumbers' mates. You know, we have whatever your starting point is, we have a course that will enable you to kind of get skilled up in the provision, and at some point, I think next year we'll also be offering apprenticeships. But it's about, generally, if you're already, for example, a qualified plumber, it's about a 2-week course in order to become skilled enough to build these things. I should mention that actually part of the Octopus model is in reducing the need for very deep skills in installing these products. So actually, I mean, this is a sore subject because a lot of boilers are very badly installed in the UK, but one of the reasons that boilers have become so cheap is because actually there's very low level of skill needed. Even when you take into account the fact that this is an incredibly, that having gas in your home is incredibly dangerous. So these people have to be very, very carefully regulated and have to, do a very safe job. But what they've managed to do is create a very standardized product that you can more or less just get off the back of your van, plug into some pipes, and you're good to go. And that's where we need to get to with heat pumps as well. So we need to get to a point where it's not a kind of in-depth bespoke project, but actually you can kind of have some archetypes that when you know what their home is going to look like when you get there. You've got all the things you need in place. You've got people who are skilled enough to be able to do those things, but not that they have to do a 2-year degree in engineering to understand what it is that they're putting in, and enable them to get up to that skill level. And by the way, to also, while they're there, be able to advise on insulation and other measures to help the fabric efficiency. So that is part of the, that is the plan. So there's the skills basis, the skills strategy is intertwined with the product strategy, making it easy and intuitive for customers, but also easy and intuitive for our engineers. We will be scaling that process up around the country. So I'd be very happy to come and talk to the Scottish Government about where you might want us to locate a heat pump engineering centre in the future in Scotland.
Can I come in on skills as well? So, I mean, that sounds good. I didn't know about that. We need more centres like that. It sounds like a really good initiative. We also have skills problems on the network side. I mean, the amount of additional upgrades to existing cables or new cables that need to go in between now and 2050, there's not enough cable jointers in the country. Not even close to being enough. And that is quite a niche skill. And it's a bit harder to make it sort of a plug and play type skill. So we need a lot more training on things like cable jointers, substation engineers, etc. And that's why I'm quite big on education as well when it comes to skills. It's a slightly longer term play because going into skills, obviously kids are younger and stuff. But the thing is that young people really care about climate change. It's like top of their agenda. And so I go into quite a few schools. A lot of them love talking about climate change, love talking about renewables, batteries, electric vehicles, all this sort of stuff. So I think we need a much bigger push into STEM and things like that within schools, universities, etc., to try and get more of these people coming out of school and university going into these areas going forward, but also demonstrating to them that what you're going to be doing, jointing a cable, for example, is going to be helping connect more renewables. So you can play your role in helping with climate change and that sort of thing as well.
Actually, and on that point, I think the average age of a boiler installer in the UK is something like 55. Yeah. Sorry then, so sorry. So the opportunity to bring young people into this industry is absolutely. But 55, but coincidentally also being the average age that the boiler engineers start to retire. So we're about to see a cliff edge in terms of. The gas boiler industry, people available in that area. That's also a huge opportunity because one of the things that people worry about with our transformation of the economy to a low carbon one is what we do with people left behind by that shift. Now, on the one hand, Octopus is able to train those engineers up to be are great at installing heat pumps. But on the other hand, actually in the gas industry or the gas boiler industry, those people are falling away anyway, and it's our opportunity to bring forward, as you say, Randolph, young people who, you know, that may not have wanted to go into the boiler industry because it's you know, it's dirty, it's old-fashioned, you know,
not cool.
It's not very cool. It doesn't speak to their values. People, you know, I think really genuinely young people, and as we've seen here at COP26 out on the streets, people are so passionate, young people, about how to decarbonise. The last thing they want to do is to go into a polluting industry that's got a very, very, you know, low shelf life. But actually, if we can say, heat pumps, not only can we train you to install a heat pump, we can train you to install an electric vehicle charger, which, by the way, we're also doing at our heat pumps at our electrification centre. So we're also training those same engineers to install electric vehicle chargers, to install smart meters, to install batteries, all the kind of whole spectrum of electrification technologies that they'll need, but also starting to train people up in how to enable the digitalisation of that whole spectrum to happen. So, you know, digital skills are going to be absolutely crucial to enabling a smart energy system, and that's part of the opportunity here for young people is for this to no longer just be a kind of you know, an industry where you need a mask and a spanner, and actually now you can sit down at a computer, you can program, you can help things to really optimize really beautifully within the home, and those whole new pathways are now available for young people.
Definitely need more data scientists, that's for sure.
We do need more data scientists, although
there's absolutely
I have to say we've
all.
got a lot of them. Yeah, we've hired them all. they're all at Optimus.
So on that point, for skills and for getting this enthusiastic base of young people, and it's worth making the point that that younger generation is now larger than the baby boomer generation. It's a huge untapped resource. How do we get them enthusiastic? How do we get them to care? And how does that fit into a wider consumer engagement approach? So I'll come to you first, Rick.
I think they already care. I'm not sure there's a mountain to climb on that. No, I totally agree with the point about opportunities, that this is really about enabling young people to use their education and then kind of propel themselves into new and more exciting jobs. So I don't think there's a massive amount to do, and I would agree that there's probably more we can do in terms of the curriculum, and there's more we can do. Certainly, as I say, we are working with a number of players in the supply chain on the skills and quality assurance side and certification and that sort of stuff. So there'll be something from the Scottish Government on that in a month or two. So I think we're doing all the right things. It's probably just a bit more of what we're already doing, and working with the grain of what people already are up for.
And I think there is a challenge here in terms of diversity and inclusion, and you sort of touched on it there, but those average age 55-year-olds are in the gas installation sector are typically also white and male. And I imagine that's the same across the engineering sector, across networks.
It is.
So we do have a piece there in terms of having to engage those students, and there is a real challenge because of the primary school to high school drop-off rate of interest in STEM subjects when you're looking at female students, when you're looking at people from minority backgrounds, from primary school where you see effectively the same levels of interest, all of a sudden, secondary school, it drops off significantly.
I think that's true. What kind of one caveat that I'd say there is that I think we get very fixated on categorising certain careers as STEM careers, or you know, and the skills that you need it therefore to be sort of maths and physics, and that's it. Actually, I mean, for example, I think I work in a STEM career, and I did politics at university. I would be amazed if I told, if I told my 16-year-old self that I'd end up working in the energy industry. I think I'd have fallen off my art stool. It is really possible for people to come into these industries through different pathways, and I think that's also something that we need to be doing. I think particularly as we are moving into a much more modern sort of product-based approach to this, there's an opportunity. Actually, so many of the people who work at Octopus are people who served Greg a coffee in a coffee shop, because he wants people who have really great people skills. He wants people who, we are a service industry, and we need to, so much of our interaction, particularly if you're going into people's homes, is about having a great attitude to people, caring, being able to empathize, being able to communicate. And so much of that is actually not what's taught on a STEM pathway. You can teach the bits, the bobs that people need to know in order to install a boiler relatively easily. There's those kind of deep skills in terms of making people feel good and happy to have you in their home.
It's just a human skill, really.
They're really good, they're really important human skills. And so I think what we need to be doing is casting our net wider. And rather than kind of going, right, this is a traditionally male industry, so we need traditionally male skills, and then we need to get women into those traditionally male skills and train them up. And, oh God, I wouldn't have started here. We should have been doing this when they were 3 years old, and we should have been sending, and by the way, I hate gender stereotypes, and I would love women to feel more empowered to go into those areas and to be encouraged at a much earlier age to explore their interests in STEM. But I'd also say we need to be very careful about pigeonholing careers as being, requiring traditionally male skills, and actually start to think, what do we really value, and what can we teach later on in the day, and what actually do we want people to come in with? Really, it's their attitude, and it's their ability to communicate, and it's their ability to make customers feel good about the interaction that they're having with the company. And those are skills that we can get from all over the place. They are very, very transferable skills.
Absolutely. So to slightly diverge from that and go on to another area, broadly now we've moved from costs to talking about skills and the potential for job creation. And I think the next thing I'd like to look at is supply chain, and is manufacturing, and is that broader bringing in of various industries to help us to get to net zero. I was speaking on another panel on Monday with some of the unions talking about steel manufacturing. And
good hydrogen application, of course. Steel.
Exactly, yeah, a very good use for hydrogen there. But there is just a broad fear from that segment of the workforce that their role is going to be redundant in future. They're not going to have an opportunity to reskill or upskill, and they don't know what's going to happen to their sector. But there are opportunities on the other side of that, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of onshoring some of that supply chain. So what do we need to do in that scale, and what is the potential and the potential benefits that decarbonisation of heat could bring to the UK economy and to UK jobs? Raggy, I know that Scotland's got a great heat pump manufacturing starting point.
Yeah,
so.
we do. We also have a whole range of innovative companies doing other stuff in the heat sector. So whether that's storage and heat networks as well, which we haven't really touched on as a well, I was going to say technology. It's not really a technology, a kind of a systems approach to decarbonising heat. So we have got a huge, well, not huge, but a significant supply chain to build out from, and that's really exciting. I think I would just come back to the point that I kind of referred to earlier on about how local that supply chain is, and so not on the manufacturing side so much, but on the installation side, and that there are parts of Scotland where we don't really have people in place now able to do some of this, and we also have parts of Scotland that are very traditionally, where those sectors that need to shift away from fossil fuels and onto decarbonised technologies are quite big employers, at the northeast, for example. So that the just transition with a kind of a capital J and a capital T sits right at the heart of all of the work that the Scottish Government is doing on both the heat transition and the wider net zero transition, and kind of cuts right across all of our strategic work on net zero. It's really, yeah, so I guess I'm agreeing. It's really important. We're doing some good stuff on that. We've got a good position to build out from, and we just need to think about that local aspect of it as well, and make sure that those are good quality jobs spread right across communities.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, like, steel is not going anywhere. We're going to need a lot of steel. It needs to be green steel, 100%. But steel itself, the demand for steel is not going anywhere. I'm quite passionate about infrastructure. You know, I think, as John Oliver said, it's really boring, but I am quite passionate about it. And to transition this economy to net zero, we need a shed load of infrastructure. You know, a lot of our infrastructure is old, it's creaking, it's falling apart. We've got a lot of infrastructure across the economy to basically get to net zero. Flexibility and things like that will help, but at the end of the day, the infrastructure, a lot of it needs upgrading. So a lot of that needs a lot of supply chain to deliver that infrastructure. So if we can get that onshore, fantastic. We should absolutely be getting that onshore. But if there are industries that are unfortunately being offshored, or they're finding it cheaper to do it somewhere else, as Clem rightly said, we should be reskilling these people. There's going to be plenty of jobs for them, and I do tend to agree that a lot of the skills that you need are not necessarily ones that you'll learn in a classroom or a university. You can be trained up in them, and it's the people skills that are going to be critical. I think the other thing, which, I mean, studied politics and obviously happening across the river is going to be critical, is why should we import steel from somewhere else that's making it in a really dirty manner? We should be looking at, you know, how we account for that sort of carbon in the supply chain as well. That's absolutely critical. We can't just keep offshoring our problems and having it be made really dirty somewhere else. Makes our accounting look good, but actually if you do it properly end to end, it could be worse.
Right. We've talked also quite frequently about local and about how you deliver at a local level. So what is the role for local in terms of this transition? I'll start with you, Randolph, because of the planning aspect.
Yeah.
We know that local planning is a bit of a mess across the UK. There's various different standards across various different local authorities, and there's not that much coordination in terms of when we deliver infrastructure, and making sure that things as simple as, if you're putting a pipe in there for gas, you may as well also put in electric, you may as well also put in fibre broadband. Like,
exactly.
How do we approach that?
And the other thing to note is that the skills within local authorities and other areas is completely different across the country. You've got some local authorities that have got quite good energy planning teams, for example. Others don't even have any energy people. So the need to do that locally is critical. As I said, you know, networks are completely different, housing stock's completely different. You know, there's people who live near industry, people who don't, people who live near solar, people who don't. We do need to take a bit of a horses for courses approach. I agree a national framework is useful, but I think it was Clem who said earlier, like, you can't have a one-size-fits-all solution. You can't prescribe the exact same thing in every single home. And that's where I do think, you know, there will be a big role for heat pumps, but hydrogen could play a role in some areas. It might just make sense locally for that. You know, particularly if you're near industry that's already using a lot of it, or if you're in a heavily constrained part of the electrical grid. But I think generally speaking, the need for local planning is really high, and what we're trying to do as networks is try and help that. So even if you don't have the skills within your local authority, or it's going to take you a bit of time to get there, we're looking at unique models. We're not just waiting for local authorities to come to us. Like, how can we go to them and help them? Do we second someone in there for a while? Help them understand what their grid is looking like, where they've got gaps with EV charge points and things like that. That sort of thing is absolutely critical. I mean, just from a purely biased perspective, when it comes to like a new development, for example, I'm not sure about Scotland, but certainly in England, the networks, I think it's gas and electricity, are not statutory consultees on that development. So we find out at the 11th hour. By that time, the road may have already been dug up and repaved. You know, so it's just crazy. Like, the planning's got to change. It's got to come in way more local, and there's got to be a lot more coordination. And I will say as well, data and digitalisation can very much help this. If you've got this all digital on a map and you can see it layer on different sort of areas, it'll become much easier to sort of visualise and plan that sort of thing. We did launch a proof of concept of a Google Earth of Energy map recently. And we need more of that sort of thing to help as well.
Absolutely.
I would very much agree with the point on data. We see that with the work that we do, both in conversations with the DNOs in Scotland, and particularly with local authorities and indeed communities who are doing renewable projects. Data is an issue. We are the Scottish Government has a heat map, which we think is it's not the answer, but it takes us some way to showing where what the sort of levels of heat demand are, and down to kind of building by building level. So that's available, and local authorities make great use of that. We're also working very closely with local authorities to support them to produce local heat and energy efficiency strategies. I think you mentioned these at the outset, Charlie. So the purpose of these, so there'll be strategies and delivery plans, and we're committed to ensuring that they are published by the end of 2023 for all local authority areas in Scotland. These strategies will set out how to decarbonise heat and improve energy efficiency across the local authority area. And the methodology that we've developed working with local authorities is very much bottom up and based on real data about real buildings and real communities. So we're quite, as you can probably tell, quite excited about local heat and energy efficiency strategies. Yeah, I would absolutely agree also that different local authorities have different capabilities and different capacities, and many of them have, in fact, different levels of ambition in terms of climate. They have, they've set climate emergency sort of targets that vary slightly underneath, as it were, the national net zero targets. So we do need to continue to work with local authorities to ensure that it's not a one size fits all, and that they're able to flex the tools and the approaches that are available to them to meet their own needs, and make sure that they're well equipped, as you say, to then engage with industry, with the network companies, and that we kind of have as much mutual understanding and kind of compatible data sets and maps as possible.
We're very close to running out of time, but I will come to you, Clem.
Well, I'd agree actually with both those points about data, and I'd say actually that's a wider question in the industry, and I think that needs to be. I think there are businesses, often regulated monopolies. I'm not particularly calling out networks here, but it does happen in the networks, where again data is seen as an opportunity for a new revenue stream, and so companies who by the way are formally nationalised often and certainly have been set up with public money, are seeing data as an opportunity for a private revenue stream, and therefore are being very closed about their data and not sharing it and not being transparent. And I think there does need to be a presumption that data should be open where it has not been paid for by that company's own private investment, and obviously in an anonymised way. But I definitely think that we need to have much greater open data, and so that we can test each other's models. If in terms of for example, as you were talking about network if a network thinks that they need to upgrade, and there's a company that looks at their data and says, actually, we think that we can get you another 10 years out of what you've already got with that physical infrastructure if we just, if our customers just use their energy a bit differently, then there's huge wins across the board there. But likewise, one of the biggest barriers to decarbonisation that we are finding at the moment is connections for some of our renewable projects, for our wind farms, for example. And then again at the other end for heat pumps, getting connections, and of course that's frustrating. We find that very frustrating when we're talking to grids about it, and grids do need to get much better at much more kind of open engagement with companies that are looking to put those technologies in. But equally, those companies need to have visibility of what's coming forward, and so we all need to be doing a lot of data sharing in that case. I'd just say, just on the kind of what the role of local authorities are, I think relatively limited actually. I don't think we should be putting more burden on local authorities who are already very stretched and have very specific local, they are providing very specific local services. Actually, while I said one size doesn't fit all. When I talk about that, I don't mean, and that's because in Coventry we'll have a different answer than in I don't know, Wigan, for example, or that may be the case. But what I mean is there are different archetypes, there are different customers, there are different personalities, different demographics. Actually, if you look at a photo of a Victorian street, it's very difficult to know where in the UK that is because they exist all over the country. Likewise, there are archetypes of housing that exist up and down the country, and I think if we get sucked into the trap of having a different local plan for every single local area, you lose those economies of scale and the learnings that you get by having a national focus. And remember, people don't speak to each other just locally. So much of the products. Of the kind of product take-up that we see, for example, on the electric vehicle side, is people talking to each other on Facebook groups. So actually, if we're making a decarbonisation project area specific, we really potentially lose out on enormous benefits. Where I would say that localism is really important is not so much in the political structures, but actually in the energy market structures. So what we do need to be doing is making the price signals that energy retailers experience, while they are, happen on they're kind of nationally applicable. You don't need to become a specialist in one area's energy market in order to be able to serve the rest of the country. What you do need to be able to do is reflect the local conditions that are happening in the energy space. So if, for example, we have a tariff called Fan Club, where if your local wind farm the turbines are spinning very fast, if there's a very high wind speed, we will cut the cost of the kilowatt hour that goes to your home in that half hour. And we need to see that incentivised. At the moment, it's subsidised by Octopus. That needs to be incentivised in the energy system as a whole, so that the grids are able to make use of that flexible resource, and so that we can use our grid much more efficiently, but also, very importantly, pass on the cost reductions of doing so to our customers directly.
So we have come to time. I'd like to start by thanking the panellists. Thank you, Raggy and Randolph, and a particular thanks to Clem for stepping in at the last minute due to an illness on the panel. So this was a fantastic discussion. I think we could have carried on for a few more hours, but understand that there's a lot going on. Hopefully you will come and join us again later today, where we'll recover some of those points on things like data and digitalisation, on consumer engagement and the innovative tariffs, as we're talking about smart metering and some of the surrounding technologies. But thank you for joining us today. That's all for this session, and good luck with the rest of COP.